What is the creepiest / most disturbing confession that you have heard from an otherwise normal person? Story 1. Back in my early 20s, I'm 41 now. I had a small group of close friends. We'd get together after work and on weekends to smoke or have a few drinks. Every now and then, someone would bring a new person into the mix. One of those new people, a guy I'll call Scott, started hanging out with us pretty regularly on the weekends. He seemed normal enough, though mostly quiet and kept to himself. One night, Scott gets stoned and tells the group how a neighbor abducted him and his younger brother at knife point from the woods behind their house and forced him to SA his younger brother while the neighbor watched. If they balked or refused, the guy would cut or poke them with the knife. Scott was telling us this story, and it's like he's not even aware we're in the room anymore. He's looking through us, not at us, completely somewhere else. He tells us that the man eventually let them go after about 8 hours. When Scott finally got home, his little brother ran and hid. So Scott went to tell his mom what had happened, but she didn't believe him. She said he was making it up to cover for why the two boys were late. The next day, Scott's little brother still wouldn't come out of his room, so Scott tells his dad and then takes his dad and shows him his little brother's bleeding. Scott tells us that everything goes to hell from there. The police were eventually called, and Scott had to retell the story over and over again, each time reliving it. His parents' marriage completely fell apart, not just because of what happened, but because his mother refused to believe him and never even told his father about it. To make matters worse, she shared the details with just about everyone, even remotely close to the family. What should have stayed private became gossip, and both boys ended up feeling humiliated and exposed. Scott says he tried to block it out, but his little brother is still haunted by it. Even after tons of therapy, their parents' divorce ended with their father getting custody. Scott goes on to explain how, for years, his brother has blamed him for everything. A couple of years pass, and Scott's little brother continues to guilt him the entire time. Eventually, his brother decides that the only way he can forgive Scott and move forward is by making Scott experience what he was once forced to endure. Over time, Scott's little brother continues to guilt him, blaming him constantly, then eventually threatening to off himself. Under the weight of that pressure, Scott gives in, but after it happens, the younger brother is overwhelmed with shame and tells their parents and immediate family what he did to Scott. Not long after, he decides he can't live with the guilt. In his note, he writes that he doesn't understand how Scott was ever able to live with himself after what happened, because he can't live with what he did to Scott. Then he offs himself. Scott tells us this entire story, and by the end he curls up into a fetal position and starts bawling his eyes out. Everyone in the room is just frozen, completely stunned. We pass the bong around in silence until Scott cries himself to sleep. The guy who originally brought him takes him home. And we never saw Scott again. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. A friend once confessed to me that every time he stayed at my apartment, which was often since we lived in different countries and he'd sometimes stay for over a month, he would watch me sleep. One morning I woke up to find him just inches from my face, staring at me. I completely freaked out. That's when he broke down and admitted everything. The wildest part, my husband was asleep right next to me. That was the most creepy for sure. It also ended our friendship. Story 3. This is the Matryoshka doll of confessions. My grandmother confided in me that her husband, my grandpa, who died the year I was born, once told her about his most worrisome night in the armed forces. He and she were stationed with the United States Air Force near Las Vegas when, one night, one of his crew members, a direct report, knocked loudly and anxiously at their door. It was the middle of the night, and the man was frantically begging my grandpa to come help him because he had really messed up this time. He got dressed, kissed my grandma goodbye, and went outside with his airman to talk. The airman was a wreck, pacing back and forth crying. My grandpa tried to comfort him, saying, "Son, I can't help if I don't know what's wrong," as my grandma recalls. The airman then suggested going for a drive. They drove out into the desert, with my grandpa growing more and more concerned as the story unfolded. It turned out the airman's fiancée had left him. She wasn't cut out for the life, and he was so upset about losing her that they'd gotten into a fight, and he'd left her in the desert. He needed help making it right. It would kill him if his folks knew he'd laid hands on a woman. My grandpa heard his confession, tried to comfort him, and told him to drive him to her, that they'd fix it. He said the airman should face his punishment, but it would all be okay. The airman felt relieved and began thanking his boss, crying in appreciation as they drove deeper into the desert and then pulled off the road. It was dark outside, and he couldn't see much, but my grandpa asked, "Okay, where is she?" His airman led him over to a big, low cactus, a little way from the road, and said, "Here she is." Lying in the sand was the fiancée, already dead. His worst nightmares were revealed, and all his hopes of getting a hurt woman to the hospital were shattered. He tried to show no worry, concern, or emotion, just enough to be reassuring. He was over an hour outside of town, alone with a murderer. The airman wanted to bury her and couldn't stop talking. How deep should they move her? How long before the animals would find her? If only she hadn't tried to leave, he wouldn't need shovels. My grandpa stood in the middle of the desert with a raving murderer in the sand while reassuring her killer that they'd somehow make it okay with the authorities. They then drove back into town and stopped at a diner, where my grandpa had to call the military police to come arrest the airman. Grandpa didn't return for a day or two, assisting the cops in finding the body, while worrying my grandma sick. She said that night changed him, that he carried that shovel with him for the rest of his life. Story 4. I have a completely normal friend. We're both in our early 40s now, who shared with me his childhood story of living with a ghost. Every night, a ghost would walk down the hallway into his bedroom and just stare at him, sometimes making noises but usually remaining quiet. He was so petrified that he would pull the sheets over his head. When it first happened, he would scream or run down the hallway to his parents' bedroom, but they would always send him back to his own room, telling him his imagination was running wild. Over time, he actually grew accustomed to the apparition, though he was still deeply freaked out by it. Personally, I don't believe in ghosts, and think there must have been some other explanation, but because my friend has such a type A, no-nonsense personality, I have to admit that listening to him tell the story so nonchalantly and straightforwardly gave me goosebumps. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. He eventually moved out of his childhood home when he was a teenager, and those ghost episodes never happened again. There are different people living in the house now, and he said he would never go back there again. Story 5. I had an ex. He wasn't my ex when he shared this. Tell me about how a few years before we met, he had a friend who would pretend to hypnotize him. He said that he played along so the guy would think he was really hypnotized because he thought it would be funny or didn't want to upset this guy, who was his friend. Well, my ex said that the guy hypnotized him and told him to stay in a certain position. He said he was afraid that this friend of his would be upset if he found out he was lying about being hypnotized. Then, the guy proceeds to do it with my ex. My ex is male, to remove any confusion. Finish. Tell him to cover himself up, and does the whole "when I snap my fingers you'll be unhypnotized" thing. My ex went along with the whole thing, never once said he wasn't really hypnotized, and even went back multiple times to let the guy do it again and again. Having that story in my head has bothered me for years. My ex called it SA, but it was so hard to accept that at 16. I mean, he went back. He let it happen. He knew it was going to happen each time he went back. How can that be S.A? I even offered to him that having a homosexual experience isn't anything to be ashamed of, but he insisted it was SA. Who am I to argue? Fear and the desire to be liked make people do a lot of strange things, including walking back into a terrible situation like that again and again. I've just never understood it. He's doing great now, as far as I know, and I wish him the absolute best. He's a great dude. I hope he's dealt with whatever that was, if it still weighs on him. Hopefully, I'm the only one of us who ever thinks about it, but I'm sure that's wishful thinking. Story 6. When I was in my mid-20s, a serious girlfriend of mine drunkenly confessed that she was willingly banged by 2 of her brothers and their friends, and that it wasn't a big deal. Suddenly, a lot of her past behavior in our relationship started to make sense, and I broke up with her shortly after because I started worrying that she might actually be dangerous. As in, off your spouse for the insurance money dangerous. It's weird how people have a hard time recognizing someone's serious mental health issues when that person is very physically attractive. Story 7. When I was 14 at a sleepover with my best friend, she told me that she used to live next door to a PDF file. He touched up and essayed two of his kids, one boy and one girl, who then told the police, who didn't believe them, especially because the mum told them they were making it up for attention. He then went to do charity work in Africa and may have essayed them more, we don't know. Then he came back to England and then essayed one of his grandkids. This little girl told her mum, who was essayed by him too. The little girl, her mum and her brother, the three victims of this man, two of them now adults, then went to the police. This time the police realized their past mistake and arrested the man, but he passed away before he could be prosecuted. I knew this previously, but she told me, you have those random snippets of childhood memories, and you don't know whether they're real imagination or dream. I nodded. Well, I have one of these about going up and down the road on my scooter when I was about 5 and him sitting in his garage. He called me into the garage and shut the door. Then about an hour later I left. That's all I remember, but a couple of years ago I was trying to put my first tampon in and there wasn't that skin stuff that's supposed to be there. You know, that barrier, and I've never cycled, rode a horse, or done gymnastics. She looked really distressed when she said this. Story 8. I was good friends with this nerdy, slightly overweight guy in high school. He could be pretty hilarious at times, but when he was hurt, he got vindictive and mean-spirited. So, a pretty typical teenage nerd, right? We used to look at all kinds of messed up stuff online and talk about crazy things, and I guess that made him comfortable enough to open up about his neighbor. He and his neighbor had been friends since childhood. One day, he brought me over to meet him. The moment the guy appeared, he immediately came off as a creep. He had his dog kenneled in his room and a drawer full of weird toy dongs that he proudly showed off to me. I never went back. My friend later told me that the two gave each other blowies and have even banged. I'm like, okay, that's weird, but they are experimenting, so whatever. Well, it didn't end there. The neighbor got my friend to watch him doing it with his dog, telling him how dogs were into humans, and he was in love with his dog. He also convinced him to film the neighbor doing it with his horse. Supposedly my friend only ever did it with the dog, but Jesus, that is still some messed up crap. I never looked at him the same afterwards. Guy is a raging alcoholic pill abuser, last I heard. Story 9. Unfortunately, this is about me. I told a friend, and they were pretty creeped out about it, and I'm quite embarrassed of it. Really? I've never done it again, and it's really changed the way I talk to people online. I cyberstalked a Battlefield 3 hacker just because he was being annoying. When BF3 became free to play, I joined a TDM server. I have quite a few hours on BF3 300+, and I really enjoyed it. To see a full server again was quite fun, and I was kicking ass. Then this guy joins. This guy starts kicking ass, headshotting me from across the map. I don't think too much of it, but I ask, "Hey man, is that all skill?" He responds, "It is," and he's streaming. BF3 isn't a very popular game, so it took less than a minute to find his Twitch stream. Just look for a picture of the same map being played, and his was the first, clearly hacking. Boxes on screen, snapping headshots, the whole 9 yards. So now I had his stream. I called it out in-game, linked the stream, and he left, and was booted a minute later. In that minute he was joking about how, as the game was free, he could just get another account and keep going on his stream. He wasn't talking, but he was typing to another streamer. Now his stream just had me as a viewer. I was pretty bored, and he had my attention. He hadn't really ruined my gaming experience. It was just, who is this jerk? His Twitch name matched his Twitter name, my Ninks, which he used to promote his stream. His Twitter was filled with bully and trolling posts at people, and he was just a smarmy jerk. No photos though. His name was included, but it wasn't a very unique name. Now I have a Twitter account, and a name? This is where it gets even worse. I start to trawl his posts. Going back months ago, I find a post that links him to a town. I Google search the town and his name, bingo. A post about Australia Day and how he thought this town had put on a really bad show, just saying how bad it was, etc., and trolling people in the comments. It was a small town and people were biting. You should organize it if you think you're so great, etc. He was eating it up. But I had his Facebook. I started looking into his profile. Posts were private, but the Facebook URL closely matched the Twitter, so I knew it was him. The profile pictures were nondescript, band pages, random crap like that. But this guy had a girlfriend, her profile was public, and she kept tagging him in posts. It was so cringy. I love you, boo, you are my world, the most beautiful girl I know, etc., etc. The guy and his girlfriend were two ham planets. He was the epitome of keyboard warrior. He had a fedora-wearing lens flare edited profile picture. It was actually just perfect. It was just so satisfying that this guy was the stereotype personified. I could have left it there, but I had to go a step further. I created another Twitch account just to let the guy know I found him. I posted his Facebook details in the chat of Twitch. There was like maximum 4 people watching him stream, but you could see it pop up on his stream chat, him pause mid-game and just not do anything for like 5 seconds. Then, he closed the stream. Story 10. One day, out of nowhere, my mom tells me that my dad drunkenly confessed something shocking. Back in the early 1990s, he and his cousin, whom my mom later dated and had a child with, picked up a hitchhiker near the beach. They were intoxicated, and one thing led to another. Before they knew it, they ended up offing the man and burying in a remote spot among the sand dunes. She assumed he was just trying to scare her into staying with him since they were going through a breakup, so she shrugged it off as macho BS. Then, years later, a story came up on the news. Authorities were asking for information about remains found in a sand dune. She wasn't really paying attention until they started describing a large belt buckle that might help identify the man. That's when she totally flipped out because my dad had bragged about taking the guy's belt off, which had a huge Texas-style buckle, and using it on him, even making fun of the buckle. The next day, the cousin called and warned her that he or his buddies wouldn't hesitate to off them if she ever said a word. Anyway, she always felt really guilty about not turning them in. But after losing my sister, who died very young, she couldn't imagine losing me too. The rest is history. They're still free, guys. Story 11. I was with some friends at a bonfire, and there were a bunch of seemingly cool, normal people there. We were all just hanging out, drinking, and having a good time. The story started flowing, and then, kind of out of nowhere, this pale Gollum-esque dude chimed in with, "One time some friends and I lit a playground on fire." We all kind of sat in silence, then awkwardly laughed and shrugged it off. The stories kept flowing. A few minutes later, he said, "Yeah, back where I grew up, it was a small town. We didn't have a lot to do, so my group of friends and I would go around the neighborhood, find stray cats, and off them." He kind of chuckled as he said it, like he expected us to laugh with him. Everyone responded with a collective, "That's really messed up, man." And again, there was awkwardness and silence. But it gets worse, and as I'm typing this, I can still see the flicker of the flames dancing on his creepy face. He literally ended the night with his next story. One time, we stole a car from a parking lot. It was me and one other friend, and we noticed that the lady had left the car running while she ran into the store, so we just hopped in and drove off. Then, right as we got out of the parking lot and onto the main road, we noticed there was a baby in a safety seat in the back. My buddy panicked, and as we got onto the main highway, he just threw the baby out of the window. We never found out if the baby was okay or not. Everyone left without really responding to that one. Later, we found out that he ended up doing some time for offing an 80-year-old lady with a gun from his balcony. Just for fun. Good dude. Story 12. A family friend, an older guy who lived down the road in rural Missouri, seemed totally normal. But once upon a time, he made moonshine in the little outhouse at the 5-family cemetery down the road. The same cemetery where my grandfather is buried now. He bottled it up and sold it to neighbors who assumed he was distilling it in his barn or basement or something. Apparently, when someone asked where his still was, he was totally nonchalant about its secretive origins and clearly thought it was no big deal. Then again, he and his family came late to the party when it came to that land, and they're not even buried in that cemetery, so I can kind of see his "not my house, not my problem" attitude. He was on a lot of people's blacklist for that one for a long time, especially since he sold it to surviving family members who had ancestors buried not even 20 feet away. There are folks around those parts who still don't talk to him, nearly 30 years later, because of it. Not exactly creepy, But when my dad told me about it, my first thought was definitely, damn George, that is frigging weird. Edit. My grandpa isn't buried in an outhouse for clarification. Story 13. A friend of mine confessed that he was essayed as a child. His parents are part of this cult that believes their leader can talk to God. The cult is decent-sized. There were about a few hundred members when I researched it. My friend said that there was a man from the church who would offer to babysit him and his little brother. The babysitter would offer them money to get their pictures taken and do unspeakable things. The church gathers a block from my house. I thought this building was a temple or a mosque, but in reality, it's some sort of cult compound. Some of the members are actually part of the local police too. If I wasn't always drunk, I would probably be scared. Story 14. I had an absolutely charming, incredibly sharp-looking close friend for a few years. It took me about a year and a half, maybe closer to 2, to realize that everything about her life was a lie. Even the intelligence she projected wasn't real. She would read a few in-depth articles on a subject, and then present the ideas as if they were her own. But she never actually understood anything beyond the surface. She even pretended to speak multiple languages by secretly watching foreign films with subtitles, and then translating the cool scenes for us, like she knew what was being said. Story 15. I took a humanities course where the teacher emphasized using the class as a kind of therapy session. People would share stories about relatives battling cancer, the loss of loved ones, and similar personal experiences. One day, I was talking with a female friend, more of an acquaintance, from that class, let's call her Anna, and the conversation turned to a meeting a few days earlier, where several stories about essayed had been shared. A told me she had considered reporting her father for SA when she was a teenager, during her parents' divorce. However, she confided that her father never actually touched her, and her mother was already dominating the situation since the family business was registered in her name for tax reasons and the divorce was dragging on. Anna was firmly on her mother's side and believed that accusing her father would bring a quick end to the proceedings. As a male, that terrified me, and given the context of the legitimate victims who had shared their stories just days before, it disgusted me. After that, I stopped meeting her outside of that class. Story 16. It's about my dad, actually. This man is a career soldier, is still in, and has many more years before he gets out. 23 years in so far. Well, he isn't the most normal person anymore. After he came home from Iraq the second time, he had changed majorly. He was put on a lot of PTSD, medications that keep him pretty normal most of the time. However, on his 48th birthday, we decided to celebrate with some friends and have a few drinks. We didn't know that he didn't take his medicine that day, and we got him a little too much to drink on whiskey. One of his non-military buddies said, "Hey man, how many of those did you actually get?" We all stop and just stare, not really wanting an answer, and hoping he was sober enough to not provide one. He wasn't. He answered with, "You know what? I don't give a crap about the a-holes." I ended. They tried to off me and my buddies. They deserved it. The only ones I do regret are the women and children that got in the way. They didn't deserve to die. We stopped giving him drinks after that, and haven't spoken about it since, but it was a shock to say the least. Story 17. The girl I met in college started chatting with me online a few years later. We grew really close, and eventually she opened up about something heartbreaking that she had been essayed. A lot, starting from when she was a child, and continuing up until her sister's wedding, just a month or two before we began dating. Most of it was at the hands of her dad, but he had also trafficked her, and a member of her church had taken advantage of her as well. She'd been pregnant a few times but had miscarried them all, leaving her with some bad health problems. When we finally met up, she had gotten away, changed her name, and hadn't told her dad where she was going. He found out through her sisters though, and still tried to interfere, especially when we got engaged. He was one of the reasons we eventually broke up, though not the only one. People asked me why we split up, but I felt it wasn't my place to say. Some things are hers to share, not mine. It's been almost 2 years since we last spoke, and I still miss her. Story 18. A friend of a friend came to my house a few times. He was generally a great guy, fun to be around with a good sense of humor. One day, my friend brought him over, and we had a fun night, drinking a bit and playing apples to apples. The guy had a little too much to drink and started hitting on my friend, which made her uncomfortable. So, I took him outside, and we talked for a while, as I waited for him to sober up. Fast forward half an hour and the guy announces he trusts me enough to tell me about the worst things he's ever done. I'm thinking it'll be something pretty common like theft, carjacking, or hiding your sister's birth control and then, a few months later, finding out you're going to be an uncle. But nope. The guy then proceeded to tell me that he had offed 2 of his friends. He went into great detail about the process when he offed the second one. And guess what? He never got caught. I was thinking, what the heck? I've got a family here, and I actually let him into my house? I couldn't react like that, though. The guy was obviously searching for some kind of redemption. I said kind things to soothe him and gently sent him home later. Never invited him over again. Story 19. I worked on a psychiatric ward for 1 year in a military hospital. One of our patients was a young man who had been arrested while doing push-ups on the White House lawn. He claimed he had a meeting with the president and was just killing time. Honestly, he's lucky he didn't get shot. He ended up staying on our ward for quite a while. During that time, we got very close. Whenever I was on shift, he would specifically ask to talk to me, confide in me, and open up. That was fine with me. It was part of my job. He said a lot of strange things. He was extremely ill. Eventually, he started making religious drawings every day, at least 7 to 10 of them daily. Then he started claiming he was a prophet. After that, he insisted he was Jesus. He even asked us to call him Jesus or Christ. For some reason, out of all the strange things he'd done, that part stuck with me the most. Despite weeks of medication, he wasn't improving. In fact, he seemed to be getting worse. Eventually, he was discharged. The last I heard, he said he had a manager and was getting a record deal as a rapper. He reportedly bought 3 brand new cars, yet there were also rumors that he was homeless. I think about him often. I really hope he's doing okay. Story 20. I work with a Polish dude who barely speaks English. He's a lovable 40-something dude who just drinks vodka and laughs infectiously all day long. A textbook carefree scamp. Every couple of months, everyone from work heads to a bar that hooks us up with half-price drinks for that particular night. It's pretty sweet. So anyway, this Polish dude and I were at the end of a long 10-person bench, laughing about nothing and drinking ice-cold cruiser. After ice-cold cruiser, it was great. Eventually, we somehow got onto the topic of what he did before he came to England. After a few brews, his English became even more scattered, but he did try, bless him. So he says he was in the army and so on and so forth, after which he said, I shoot 7 men and off them. Now that might not seem too heavy for you, but it blew me away. He was on the front lines during the Kosovan War from what I could gather. I couldn't and didn't want to get too much more out of him due to the language barrier. Also, some gnarly, illegal crap happened during that war, which I don't think I could bear to know about. Keep smiling, Pete. Story 21. My great-uncle likes kids. You know, like really likes them. It suddenly made a whole lot more sense that none of his adult daughters were ever married or had a serious long-term relationship and are overweight with self-esteem issues. Every other aspect of his life is perfectly normal, and I would have never expected that from him. There was a court case before I was born that was dismissed. My mother never even let me meet him until early this year because she didn't want to take the chance that he might act indecently towards me. Story 22. I have a couple posts. One of my friends once used a knife on someone, and that person didn't survive. He wasn't charged because he claimed it was self-defense. He truly believed the other person was armed, but they weren't. He's been messed up about it ever since. When I was 13, my 16-year-old friend told me she used to crap herself until she was 13 in an effort to keep her dad from essaying her. She threatened to call the cops, and her dad offed himself with a gun in their living room. I got some more for you. My friend has long dreads and had a pretty bad case of lice. When he came back from traveling, his roommates wouldn't let him in the house until he was lice-free. Being poor, he couldn't afford treatment, so he dunked his head in some sort of gasoline, then he lit a cigarette. He has no nipples. Most of his body is skin-grafted. He still has dreads, but he is lice-free. A friend of mine is a product of SA. He has serious identity issues as his mother is Native American and his father is white. He absolutely despises white people. My best friend that passed away confided in me that his girlfriend from back in his home state we meet in college was pregnant and giving the baby up for adoption. She also had leukemia, but beat it. I know during the pregnancy she needed a blood transfusion. He told me he didn't really care about her anymore. He was struck by a car and she had just given their baby up for adoption. They started a lengthy court battle to get back custody, and I never kept in touch with her enough to find out the outcome. Another good friend confided in me that his girlfriend was repeatedly essayed by her brother. She could always get uncomfortably perverted in public, so I was really surprised to hear that. Oh, and a friend of mine told me her parents wiped her A for her until she was 12 and they melted her ice cream before she could eat it, because they were afraid it was too cold. She also told them that her car broke down and she needed 10K to buy another. It was fine. She lied and used the 10K to pay for her girlfriend at the time to help her for her gender change operation in Thailand. Story 23. On my way home from counseling, an elderly lady talked to me about her experience as a nurse in a mental institution. Some of the things she said were horrifying and sad. I think she was glad to get it off her chest. This included patients with schizophrenia who were abandoned by families, people admitted into the wards because of their homosexuality with some very upsetting consequences, and more. Most involved patients offing themselves. I sat there and listened, though I'm not sure how much of it actually sunk in until I got home. Story 24. In 2009, one of my closest friends made a confession I found disturbing back then. He told me that he was gay, and my reaction was completely wrong. What I did was kick him in the face and tell him he should cure himself from his disease, or I would never want to see him again, and I never did. Sadly, 2 months after this happened, he offed himself. I'm not even 100% sure this was because of me, but no one else knew that he was gay. I didn't even attend his funeral because then I had no idea it could be because of me. I realized that later, and I still mourn him. I'm so sorry for this, but I never told this to any one of his friends or family. I'm donating the Human Rights Campaign and Suicide Prevention Foundations today, and I think this is the best I can do. Something like this is something I wish never happens again. Story 25. My ex-boyfriend could not handle our breakup. I broke it off with him because of significant issues. Their drugs, stealing, etc. I finally got out of it. He didn't. He would not give up on me. At first he was desperate at trying to get back with me, following me, waiting in obscure locations for when I walked to my car, and even threatening to off himself if I didn't see him. I blocked his numbers, changed my email, transferred colleges, moved a state away, and tried to move on with my life. He was in and out of jail for drugs and stealing in addition to concealed weapons charges, which was scary for me knowing all the time when he confronted me alone. It was about 4 or so years later when I received the creepiest phone call. It was him calling to tell me that he was looking for me all this time. The tone of his voice, the horrific laughter. I freaked out. I called my parents and informed them that if I go missing, this is who has me. I called campus security and made sure they had his description. He never showed up, but my God, the voice on the other end of the line still brings chills. It scares me to this day that he is out there possibly looking for me. Luckily, I've become more aware of precautions to take. Pepper spray, learning self-defense, etc. If I was in another state where obtaining a gun was easier, I would have done so. Unfortunately, it's not so easy where I am now. I do, however, have panic buttons and GPS locators, so if something were to happen, I can be found. I try not to let fear or paranoia run my life. I try to take the best precautions, but I will always have that fear that just around the corner, he will be waiting for me. She went even further than just faking intelligence. She made up an entire story about her father abusing her mother to excuse failing her university exams. She lied to people about being a medical student just to seem impressive and even gave out dangerous medical advice like she knew what she was talking about. She kept up the act with her own family too, claimed she was a brilliant student in med school. I'm not sure if they ever believed her, but the lies didn't stop there. There were so many more. It was exhausting just trying to keep up with whatever version of herself she was selling that day. She was incredibly fun to be around, but honestly, a terribly toxic friend. Still, I was afraid she'd completely lose it if I exposed her secrets to everyone. So instead, I quietly warned the people she was abusing or potentially putting in danger to stop her from doing any more harm. Several times I tried to convince her to go into therapy, but eventually I gave up. She was in total denial about me knowing everything, and I was terrified she might hurt herself if she found out what everyone really thought of her. Then one day, out of the blue, she packed her things, said goodbye with a hug and a huge smile, and left for another country to pursue her medical studies. I've kept evidence of all the chaos, just in case it ever comes back around. I'd say that if you genuinely pay attention to people around you, you'll find out many creepy stories like this. Some people see friends come and go and actually never have any idea of what's going on in their lives. Story 26. I started seeing a girl about a month ago. She recently told me she was essayed when she was 5. Her parents were druggies and had her at a young age, so she stayed with her grandma. But my girl's grandma was a drunk, so she would have her son, her uncle, take care of her. He was about 25 when this happened. As the story goes, he went to go score whatever drugs he was on at the time and left his 5-year-old niece unattended in the car for who knows how long. When he returned, he found her covered in blood. She had to have a reconstructive surgery in her downtown area. She confided all of this in me before we became intimate, as she has confidence issues because one side looks stretched doesn't bother me one bit. She says she still remembers his face and tries not to think about it. The most messed up thing is when the uncle brought her home, they did nothing, because he was buying drugs at his dealer's house when it happened. They did nothing to save the D-head uncle that brought the 5-year-old around a bunch of junkies. Who knows what actually happened? He could have allowed it to happen for drugs. About 6 months after this happened, he OD'd himself. My girl says she doesn't like talking about it, so I don't ever bring it up. But I know it has definitely affected her mentally. I just wish there was something I could do to help her forget. Story 27. A couple of years ago, I was hanging out with some friends I hadn't seen in a while. One of them, more of a friend, was a heavy drinker and wanted someone to drive him to get cigarettes because he was too drunk to drive. I offered to take him. Along the way, he slurred, "Remember that time back at the party house we used to hang out at when we did that stuff together?" I was puzzled and said no. He went on to say that we had done some gay things together. I'm not gay, and even if I were, he's certainly not my type. In any case, nothing like that ever happened, and I told him so, but he kept insisting that we had done something like that. He's not openly gay or anything either. It made for an awkward ride back. I later learned he said a similar thing to another friend with whom nothing like that had happened. Story 28. Not so much that I heard, but I saw. I had this lady friend, and we used to hang out a lot. You know, the usual drinks, smokes, music, and so on. One night, after we'd gone out together, I went home with her to spend the night. Once we got there, she changed into something more comfortable, took a hypodermic needle out of a drawer, went to the bathroom sink, and started to stick it into her arm, draining blood all over the sink. I didn't know what was going on, so I just promptly asked, "What the heck are you doing?" She calmly replied, "Nothing. I just enjoy watching my blood flow and paint the sink red." It turned out she actually did it fairly regularly. That was one of the more bizarre nights of my life, and she became one of the most influential people to have come into my life. Still, creepy as hell. Story 29. This guy asked me out on a date, and I happily agreed. We were meeting up for pizza, though I think he had been drinking a little before our date. Things were going well enough. We were being really cute, holding hands, and the overall mood of the evening was lighthearted and fun. He ordered a beer and a refill. Maybe even 2 after that. After a while, he looked at me, paused, and then started telling me a story about how he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia as a child. He said he still experienced occasional auditory hallucinations and health-related delusions. It wasn't terribly creepy. I think it was mostly the timing and the unexpectedness of it in such a public and impersonal environment. He's a lovely person and incredibly honest, but the lingering challenges involving his mental health, including the initial red flags around alcoholism, which he later confessed to, really complicated both his life and our relationship. Story 30. I had subconsciously begun to realize that a relative was becoming a very cold, manipulative egotist, but it didn't truly click until she told me, plain as day, that a psychic had told her weeks in advance that an elderly relative was going to die soon. She essentially had weeks to prepare for it, was ready when it happened, and it did happen exactly when the psychic said it would, then stepped up as the rock of the family, supporting everyone as we grieved. I can still hear her mother explaining how proud she was of her for being there the way she was, and I felt my heart break as I listened, knowing it was all just a game to this relative, a way to get in her good books. She took us all through the grief, me included. I still can't believe she straight up told me it was all just a plan for her to feel better about herself. She then explained that she went back to the psychic immediately after the death, but the spirits basically said, too soon, which, looking back, is unintentionally funny. A few weeks later, she went back again, and the spirits congratulated her for how amazing she'd been the whole time. Meanwhile, they apparently had nothing but criticism for the rest of the family. That's when it really hit me. I was listening to a narcissist. A few years later, she cut me and a few others out of her life over something minor, and by cut me out, I mean she turned her puppet husband and kids against me and acted like the whole fight was so emotionally traumatic for her that her mother would take pity on her instead of us. My favorite line was, I was driving and started thinking about the fight, and I became so upset I had to pull over. I thought I was going to throw up. She's slowly but surely driving the rest of the family away from her too by sheer force of her ugly personality, her sickeningly fake marriage, and her total lack of respect for anyone she can take something from. I just despise her for sharing that secret plot with me, because now I have to carry that burden forever, just to avoid devastating my own grandmother. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.